The winter had receded, but the land still bore its bones. Pale sagebrush twitched in the breeze, and the soil cracked with thirst under the weight of the sun. Elias Calloway rode alone. His horse, Boone, was a dust-colored gelding that moved like it knew the way even when Elias didn't. The plains stretched endless in every direction, no birdsong, no sign of cattle, just the wind and the hush of old ghosts. Elias was not a young man, 38, with a face carved by sun and regret, and hands calloused from mending barbed wire and burying mistakes. His ranch, if it could be called that, squatted 30 miles south in a valley the maps forgot. No wife, no children, just a busted fence line and a rifle he hadn't cleaned in months. He'd come out looking for a strayed steer, but found no tracks, no droppings, nothing living. It was on the third day, riding through a canyon split like a cracked knuckle, that he saw it, metal glinting under the hard light, not natural, not right. He dismounted slowly, Boone snorting behind him. It was a cage, not a trap. A full cage, 6 by 6 feet, wrought of iron, with a lock rusted by time or neglect. There was no wagon nearby, no trail to suggest it had been dragged here. Just sun-baked earth and the cage sitting wrong in the world like a wound. Inside was a girl. She sat curled, arms over her knees, filthy dress bunched at her ankles. Her hair, black and matted, clung to her face. Elias didn't speak right away. He'd seen foxes fake death. He'd seen men do worse. Her eyes met his, gray, not pleading, not wild, watchful. "You hurt?" he asked, voice rough from days of dust. She blinked slow, then nodded once. He came closer. The iron groaned as he tested the lock. It had no keyhole. Welded shut, seams scorched like it had known fire. Someone had meant this to hold, to keep. "What's your name?" he asked. She didn't answer. He took a step back, scanned the landscape. No footprints, no wagon ruts. Just her and the cage and the silence. It took him half a day to break it open, smashed a length of rebar against the weakest seam until it gave with a shriek. She didn't flinch. When the door opened, she didn't move. "You can come out now," he said. Still, she stayed. So he left the door open and walked back to Boone. He poured water into a tin cup and laid it in the shade. She came after 15 minutes, bare feet silent, took the water. Drank slow like she didn't trust it. "How long you been out here?" he asked. Nothing, just those gray eyes. He didn't press her. That night he built a fire far from the cage and laid his coat out for her. She didn't speak. Didn't eat much, but she didn't run. Next morning he offered to take her back. She shook her head once. Firm. Family. No reply. Name. Still nothing. He stopped asking. They rode south. Boone held the weight without protest. The girl sat behind him, small arms wrapped loose around his waist. Back at the ranch, Elias showed her the pump, the stove, the cot. She walked through the place like someone who didn't believe in walls, always watching, always listening. He gave her space, built a second cot, told her she could sleep wherever she wanted. That first night, she slept sitting up, back to the wall, eyes open. He didn't sleep at all. By the fourth day, she spoke. "June." It came out quiet, like wind through grass. "That your name?" A nod. "You got a last name?" "No." He didn't ask why, didn't ask who put her in that cage. He'd known enough cruel men to understand some questions were wounds, not keys. But that night he locked the door to the barn for the first time in 6 years, and laid his rifle by the bed, just in case the past came looking. What he didn't know then was that the past wasn't done. That the girl wasn't the only one buried out in the canyon, or that what put her in that cage was still breathing, still watching, still waiting. He'd found her, but the world she came from hadn't let go. The girl didn't speak again for 3 days, not a whisper, but she moved like she knew silence better than language. In the mornings, Elias would find her sweeping the porch with a bundle of twigs, though he'd never asked. By dusk, she'd vanish into the barn, sometimes climbing to the loft to stare through the slats. Watching, waiting, he didn't question it, Some things needed to be worn in like boots: time, quiet, distance. On the fifth morning, Elias went to town. He told her he'd be back by nightfall, left half a loaf of bread and a jar of well water on the table. When he rode out, she was sitting in the dirt behind the house, turning a rusted horseshoe in her hands like it held some answer she couldn't read. Woodbine was 40 miles east, 200 souls and a sheriff with more mustache than backbone. Elias didn't go for company. He needed kerosene, oats, and a new coil of rope. He didn't mention the girl, didn't mention the cage. But he watched, listened. Drifters talked loud in saloons, louder when drunk. One man spoke of a burned-out church found 3 counties north, charred bones in the pews, no crosses left. Another told of a preacher who turned cruel and took to branding sinners. Men like that didn't just vanish. They moved, changed their names, kept the knife under their coat. Back at the ranch, the air had gone thick. Boone's ears twitched at shadows. The crows that usually circled the east ridge had gone quiet. June didn't wait for Elias on the porch. He found her in the barn, standing in the loft rafters like a wraith, her face streaked with soot. "What happened?" he asked. She didn't answer, just held out her hand. Black feathers, dozens, tied at the stems with red thread. He took them, turning the bundle over. Ritual, marker. A sign left for her, not him. Someone been here. A nod. "Did you say them?" Another nod. "How many?" She hesitated, then raised 2 fingers. Elias didn't sleep that night either. The next morning he taught her how to shoot. He set up bottles on fence posts. She took the rifle with hands too steady for her age. He didn't ask who taught her before. She missed the first 2, then hit the third dead center. Said nothing, just reloaded. That evening she burned the feathers in the stove. The smoke smelled wrong. Weeks passed. She spoke more, but never about before. She asked about the cattle, about the stars, about whether wolves ever took children. He told her yes, sometimes, but that it wasn't wolves he feared. She started wearing boots he found in the cellar, a size too big, wrapped the laces around her ankles, took to carrying a knife in her boot sheath. One she'd made herself from broken glass and a horn handle. He let her. One night, thunder rolled in. They sat on the porch, watching the storm crawl across the plains. She leaned her head against the railing and spoke without looking at him. "They buried my sister in the well. Said if I screamed, she'd stay there forever." Elias didn't speak, just reached for his pipe and lit it with shaking fingers. They had a bell they rang, every morning, every night. You had to bow when it rang. She paused. I didn't bow. He looked at her then. The lines in her face, though young, told of someone who had seen men die and not flinched. "I bit him," she said. "When he came to take me to the chapel, he hit me with a coal shovel. That's when they put me in the cage." Elias didn't ask who they were. He already knew. The next day he began fortifying the house. Reinforced the doors, reset the traps near the creek bed, wired a bell above the barn ladder. He dug up a buried trunk from under the chicken coop. Inside was a shotgun, 2 boxes of shells, and a Bible with a name scratched out. When June saw it, she smiled, a tight, haunted thing. "I'm not going back," she said. "You won't have to." But even as he said it, Elias felt the weight of it, like making a promise to a storm, because things that crawl out of cages don't run, they wait, and they remember. Summer came brutal and fast, baking the clay earth until it cracked like old skin. The cattle wandered further each day in search of water, and Elias let them go. What was left of his herd wasn't worth dying for. Instead, he watched the ridge. June no longer asked for permission. She'd taken to roaming the property in a wide arc, silent as dusk, checking traps, marking trees with charcoal crosses. She never ventured beyond the third ridge. That's where the birds stopped singing. Elias spent his evenings cleaning guns. He hadn't done it regular since the war. The old habits came back with a strange comfort: oil, cloth, the weight of steel in his palm. June watched him, learned. Her hands were quicker than his, her gaze didn't flinch from blood. One afternoon, a dog wandered onto the porch. Mangy thing, half a tail, ribs poking through its hide. June fed it without a word. It stayed. She named it Bristle. The next day, Elias found a string of bones nailed to the barn door. Not animal, human. Finger bones by the look, clean too well to be natural. He burned them without telling her. That night, she whispered a prayer in a tongue he didn't know. He didn't ask. That week, June started carving symbols into the wooden posts around the house. Circles, lines, a shape that looked like an eye with a cross through it. She never explained their meaning, but Elias didn't stop her. There was a rhythm to her now, a quiet war unfolding behind her silence. One morning they found the water barrel overturned. Tracks circled it, bare feet, narrow strides, too small for a man, too strange for a child. Elias followed them to the edge of the property. They ended abruptly, like whoever made them stepped back into the dirt. He set snares that night. June added bone shards to the bait. They caught nothing. 2 nights later, Bristle began to howl. Low, mournful, staring at the barn, June sat up straight in her cot and reached for the knife under her pillow. "Something's inside," she said. Elias grabbed the shotgun. They found the loft empty, but the rope ladder had been cut. The trapdoor nailed shut from the inside. June climbed through the hay chute. When she opened the door, she found feathers again, not crows this time, dove, white, broken at the neck. June didn't speak for 2 days. When she came back to herself, she asked Elias for nails, wire, and a hammer. She built something behind the house, a kind of altar low to the ground, hidden beneath willow branches. She sat beside it every dusk, hands in her lap, whispering. The dog wouldn't go near it. Then came the rider. Just after dawn, a figure crested the eastern ridge. Black hat, black horse, moved slow, no pack, no water. Just a satchel and a rifle slung across his back. He didn't wave, didn't shout. Elias met him at the gate. "Can I help you?" he asked. The man looked past him toward the house. "I'm looking for someone." "Wrong place," Elias said. The rider nodded, as if he'd expected that. "You sure about that?" Elias leveled the shotgun. "I am now." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "If you see her, tell her the bell's still ringing." He turned his horse without another word and rode back the way he came. Elias stood at the gate long after the dust settled. That night he locked every door, nailed the windows shut, gave June the rifle and took the dog into the barn with him. She didn't sleep, neither did he. Because they both knew what the man meant. The bell wasn't just a memory, it was a summons, and someone had heard it. The land thickened with heat and omen. Days stretched wide and hollow, as if the sun itself held its breath. June didn't speak of the rider. She didn't need to. The bell echoed without sound, vibrating through the bones of the ranch. Even Bristle felt it, whining low, pacing the edges of the property like a sentry doomed to die on his post. Elias rode the perimeter twice a day, always alone. June stayed close to the house now, but not idle. She sharpened things. Knives, stakes, lengths of barbed wire hammered flat. She buried tools in marked spots around the house and memorized each one. She taught herself to reload the revolver with her eyes closed. She was 12, maybe 13. She looked older now. One morning, the sky turned ochre. A storm rose, but no wind came with it, just a thick stillness as though the earth itself recoiled. Bristle barked once, then fled under the porch. June stood at the back of the house, her hand hovering over her knife. "There's more than one now," she said. Elias didn't ask how she knew. That night, the dogs from town howled in unison, all of them, 20 miles away, long and hard like they'd smelled the dead walking. Elias didn't sleep. He sat by the fire with his shotgun across his knees and a lantern burning low. June sat across from him, carving something into her arm. He didn't stop her. By morning, the first cross was burned into the barn door, crude, deep, blackened at the edges like someone had branded it with iron. Elias spat and checked the traps. Nothing had been triggered but the soil bore prints now, dozens of them, bare feet, shallow impressions that seemed too light to be real. June walked the prints barefoot, then wiped her hands on her dress. "They're trying to confuse the land," she said. Elias didn't understand, but he knew the way old wars made ghosts of places. There were patches of France where the soil still refused to grow wheat. The blood soaked in too deep. That night they saw fire on the ridge, 5 torches, held high, no movement, no calls, just light. June didn't speak. Elias loaded the Winchester and stayed by the door till dawn. When the sun rose, the torches were gone. No ash, no tracks, just that same silence pressing on the air like a hand over a mouth. 2 days later, the well ran dry. Not empty, dry, stone walls cracked from within, clean and sudden. Elias lowered the bucket and heard it strike something soft. When he pulled it up, it was full of feathers, wet, red, still warm. He threw the bucket aside and sealed the well. June sat by the altar that evening with a string of teeth in her lap, not hers, not his. She threaded them like beads, whispering in a cadence that wasn't prayer, something older, something taught by fire and grief. She looked up once. "They took your name," she said. Elias didn't answer, not for a long time. "Yeah," he said finally, "they did." She nodded like she already knew. "Then you'll have to take it back." That night, she slept soundly for the first time since the cage. Elias didn't. He stared at the coals in the stove and thought about the name they carved on his tombstone back in Arkansas. A name he never answered to again after the war ended and the killing didn't. At dawn, the second cross was branded on the side of the house. This time it bled. The blood didn't dry. Elias tried washing it, scrubbing it with lye, salt, even fire. But the stain remained, seeping through the wood like sap, dark and thick. It smelled sweet at first, then sour. June wouldn't go near it, neither would the dog. Bristle began sleeping in the barn, ears twitching, body rigid like a taut bow. Something was coming. The third day after the second cross, Elias spotted a figure at the edge of the wheatgrass. A woman this time, thin, shrouded in a tattered blue shawl, standing perfectly still. Her face was turned down, hands clasped before her like she was praying. She didn't move, not for an hour, not when the wind picked up, not when Bristle barked. Elias aimed the rifle. The woman looked up, no eyes. Just skin stretched smooth where they should have been, lips sewn shut with black thread, looped and knotted. A dozen threads swaying like cobwebs. He didn't fire. By the time he blinked, she was gone. June found another sign behind the smokehouse, a circle of animal skulls, each turned inward, their jaws packed with ash. She said nothing, just stomped the bones to dust and scattered the pieces. That night the bell rang, not real. Not on the property, but clear as glass inside Elias' ears. He dropped his knife. June looked up from her cot, already pale. "They're calling again," she said. "They want me to answer." "Will you?" She didn't speak. Instead, she opened a small tin box she kept hidden beneath the floorboards. Inside were 6 items: a ribbon burned at the end, a shard of broken mirror, a lock of blonde hair, a rusted button, a length of chain, and a tooth still rooted in blood. She took the mirror and set it on the windowsill facing east. "They want to see," she said, "but I won't show them." Elias boarded the windows shut. On the 7th night they heard chanting, faint at first, like the wind had picked up a hymn. Then clearer, low voices in a language not meant for the mouth, rising and falling like waves of rot. Bristle howled until his throat bled. June stood barefoot in the kitchen, eyes closed, lips moving. Not to match the chant, but to answer it. Elias grabbed her shoulders. "You don't have to speak their tongue." She looked at him with something older than grief. "I already did." He stepped back. That night, she placed the broken mirror in the fire. It didn't melt, it hissed, cracked, and began to bleed. The wind screamed through the slats in the barn. A lantern exploded without warning. The altar behind the house smoldered, then turned to ash. In the smoke, Elias saw faces, not the dead. The nearly dead, men with rope burns on their necks, girls with hands sewn shut, eyes missing, teeth filed to points, not ghosts, not illusions, warnings. The cult wasn't finished. They were gathering. By dawn, Elias found the third cross burned into the dog's side. Bristle didn't cry. He just leaned into Elias' hand and waited to die. Elias wept when he buried him. June placed the last of the feathers atop the grave, then turned to the horizon where the sun refused to rise. "They'll come at dusk," she said. "They always do." Elias nodded. He cleaned the shotgun again, hung a rope across the gate, lit the fire with old church hymns, and whispered his name for the first time in 15 years. He wasn't running anymore. Neither was she. Dusk came early, not with color but with the bruising of the sky, as if the heavens themselves flinched from what walked below. The sun dipped behind the hills and did not cast shadow. The light went flat, empty. As if time itself held its breath, Elias lit the perimeter lanterns. June stood beside him, dressed in a burlap coat stitched with iron nails. She had smeared ash across her cheeks. Her hair was braided with bone, no fear in her, only readiness. "They'll come quiet," she said, "but not unseen." He nodded, loaded the final shell into the Winchester, and bolted the door behind them. Then the bell rang, not in their ears this time, but outside, clear and physical. The clang of rusted iron swinging slow, steady, swinging the way a noose does before the fall. Elias stepped onto the porch. The sound was coming from the old sycamore near the dry creek. There was no bell there, but it swung all the same. And then they came. Figures in gray robes, some crawling, some walking backward, some dragging nails through the dust like plows. Their faces were covered in masks, wooden, cracked, some carved into mockeries of saints. At least a dozen, maybe more. Elias lost count. They moved without sound, feet never quite touching the ground. At their center, a tall figure walked forward, not masked. His face was burned on one side, the skin puckered and bubbled like candle wax. His right eye was white, blind, but the left burned with something worse than sight. He carried the cage door in his hands. Rust still clung to the hinges. He stopped 20 feet from the house. The others fanned around him like vultures waiting for meat to stop breathing. June stepped forward. "You came late," she said. The burned man smiled. "We always arrive when the penitent stops bleeding." "You took my sister," she said. "She gave herself. You put me in the dark. We offered you light. You rang the bell." He raised the cage door above his head. "You never stopped listening." Then June whistled. It was low, sharp. From the earth behind the house, smoke erupted, not from fire, but from the altar's remains. The circle she had built long ago flared to life, runes igniting with sulfur and iron. The wind reversed direction. The chanting broke, and the land screamed, not the air. The land. Elias raised the rifle. June spoke words Elias didn't know. They cut the air like blades. The sky bled. One of the cultists caught fire without flame. Another dropped, convulsing, foam pouring from his mask. The ground split under their feet. The tall man didn't flinch. "You learned nothing in the cage," he said. June stepped off the porch. "I learned you're afraid of silence." She walked toward him. He raised the door like a shield. She pulled the knife from her belt. He swung first. She ducked low, drove the blade into his thigh. He staggered. She twisted it free, slashed across his belly. He dropped the door, blood soaking into the dust. June knelt beside him as he writhed. "You'll never be clean," he whispered. "I'm not trying to be." Then she shoved the knife through his good eye. The others began to scatter. Elias shot one as it fled. Another fell into the trench the altar had opened and screamed until the earth swallowed him. June stood in the ruin of the sycamore's shadow, covered in ash and blood, staring at the cage door still twitching on the ground. "It's done," Elia said behind her. She didn't look at him. "No," she said. It remembered. He didn't argue. That night they buried the bodies in a trench and salted the earth. June burned the door. The fire didn't touch the metal, but she stayed beside it until the hinges snapped on their own. By morning the cross on the house had faded. The blood was gone. So was the sound of the bell. The land breathed again. And in the silence that followed, Elia set a new post beside the gate, carved her name into it, just her first, June. He asked if she wanted more. She said no. The name she chose would be her own, and the cage her memory. Not her prison. The land healed slow. Ash sank into the soil, blood fed the roots, and silence became its own kind of harvest. Summer cracked, then broke, and the first frost kissed the ridge without warning. The ranch still stood, but it was no longer just Elia's. June had carved her presence into it, not loud, not spoken, but in the way ghosts settle into old floorboards and don't leave. She didn't leave either. Elia's offered her coin once after the last body rotted. Said she could ride east, find a town with books, maybe a school, a bed that wasn't made of hard memory. She stared at the offer, then looked past it. "I'm not done here." So he didn't ask again. She built a second well, dug it herself 20 paces north of the salted one. Took her weeks. Hands blistered, nails cracked. When she hit water, she didn't smile. Just drank, washed her face, and left a small stone at the lip, a marker for her sister. Sometimes at night, Elias would catch her walking the edge of the property, still barefoot, still listening. The sky watched her, stars dimmed behind the smoke of her thoughts. She never wandered past the altar's remains, though she never said why. She didn't need to. People came now and then, travelers, a lost cowhand. A dying woman on a mule with a baby clutched to her chest. They were always the same, burnt at the edges, running from something they couldn't name. June gave them water, bread, sometimes a warning. Not all were welcome. One man came asking questions about a bell and a girl and a cage. He didn't leave. They buried him under the sycamore. Elias taught her how to set fence again, how to track storm patterns, how to know when cattle were lying. She taught him how to listen to the earth, to hear the shift in the wind that meant a shadow was coming. They spoke little. They didn't need to. One day she found a book in town, dusty, pages stuck with age. It was about names, old ones. Names used before scripture twisted them into fear. She didn't read it aloud, just kept it by her cot, dog-eared and marked in red thread. She carved a new symbol into the gatepost, not a warning, a seal, a claim. Years passed. Elias grew gray, his hands slowed. His breath grew shallow in winter. When he died, he left no words, just a folded piece of paper on the table with 2 names scratched in charcoal, his real one and hers. June burned it without reading it, buried him under clean dirt, under a sky that no longer choked. She kept the ranch. She grew into it. And when people spoke of the place out west, where fire once danced in the soil and a girl rose from a cage with knives in her blood, they didn't call it cursed anymore. They called it watched, and they knew never to ring a bell where she might hear it.